Imagine trying to find a specific, uh, deeply important location, but the ground you're standing on is moving at like 3 knots.
Right, the entire landscape is just constantly shifting.
Exactly. The wind is howling right at your back, and the
Wow.
scenery looks exactly the same in literally every single direction.
Just water. Endless water.
Yeah, just dark, churning water. There are no carved stones out there. There are no oak trees to use as a landmark.
No wrought iron gates?
No gates, no groundskeeper to point a finger and say, there it is, that's the exact spot. You are miles offshore, suspended over thousands of feet of ocean, and you are holding the remains of someone you love.
It's a really jarring image when you compare it to what we're used to.
It really is. I mean, for generations, the human brain has been completely conditioned to associate grief with geography.
Right.
Like, we crave a fixed point.
Oh, absolutely. We want a map. We want a specific plot of land.
A localized container for our memories. We like things to be visible. We like them to be measurable. But there is this massive cultural shift happening right now beneath our feet. Or, well, I guess off our shores is a better way to put it.
That's a good way to phrase it.
We are looking at a landscape of remembrance that is just entirely fluid. It's stripping away all that traditional architecture of mourning and replacing it with something infinitely more vast.
And infinitely more complicated, honestly. That tension between the human desire for a permanent marker and the relentless sort of erasing power of the ocean, that's really the defining paradox here.
Yeah, the paradox of modern memorialization. Welcome, everyone, to what feels like our very own entry into the funeral channel for today's deep dive.
I like that, the funeral channel.
Right, because we're stepping into a subject that, let's be honest, usually completely empties the room at dinner parties.
People do tend to run for the exits when you bring up end-of-life planning.
They really do, but it is one of the most profound transitions happening in society today. And whether you are, actively navigating this for a family member right now, or maybe you're quietly thinking about your own legacy, or you're just insanely curious about how these ancient human rituals adapt to modern life, this is going to change how you look at the shoreline.
It definitely changed my perspective.
So today's mission, we are unpacking the surging popularity of ash scattering at sea. And our roadmap for this deep dive is grounded in a really fascinating document called Ashes to Ocean, The Truth About Burial at Sea.
Which pulls some incredible insights from the folks over at the funeral program site.
Yes, exactly. We are going to deconstruct the emotional psychology driving families away from land. We're going to decode the strict and honestly heavily misunderstood environmental regulations around this, and we'll break down the literal maritime logistics of pulling off a modern oceanic farewell.
The logistical evolution alone is just staggering. We are taking an act as ancient as human civilization, returning elements to the water, and we're filtering it through, like, modern environmental science and maritime law.
And GPS technology, which we will definitely get to.
Oh yeah, the GPS aspect is wild. It requires a complete reimagining of what a tribute actually is.
Okay, so let's start with that reimagining, specifically the psychological pivot. Because when families transition from a land-based mindset to a sea-based mindset, they're stepping away from a completely static environment.
Right. A cemetery is literally designed to never change.
Never. The grass is artificially kept green. The stones are designed to withstand centuries of weathering. It is an exercise in defiance against time.
Defiance is the perfect word. You're trying to freeze time.
But the ocean, conversely, is pure kinetic energy. It's constantly churning, it's evaporating, freezing, flowing. So why does a grieving mind, which is usually searching for stability, find comfort in an environment that is that unstable and chaotic?
Well, the comfort actually comes precisely from that lack of static finality.
Really? How so?
Think about it. In the depths of grief, a static cemetery plot can sometimes just reinforce the harsh reality of death. It's immovable. It's final.
It's a dead end, literally.
Literally and figuratively, yes. But the expanse of the ocean, it offers a visual representation of a continuing journey.
That continuing journey, okay.
Yeah, many families actually describe the ocean setting as peaceful and transformative. They're reacting to this idea of a return to nature. The ocean represents the ultimate cycle of life. It isn't a dead end at all. It's this global circulatory system.
So dispersing the ashes is more symbolic.
Exactly. Dispersing ashes into the tides symbolizes a release. It's a release from the suffering and the physical limitations of human life. You're transferring the essence of that person into an ecosystem that is ancient, powerful, and just ceaselessly moving.
Okay, I want to unpack this a little more because I keep getting stuck on this concept of object permanence in the context of grief.
Object permanence, like the developmental psychology concept.
Yeah, exactly. Like we learn as infants that when an object is hidden, it still exists,
Right.
right? Peekaboo.
Right. Yeah.
And as adults, we unconsciously apply that to traditional burial. We know the physical form is beneath the earth. We draw comfort from that physical proximity. We can point to the dirt and say, they are right there.
Yes, the containment provides comfort.
But when you scatter ashes at sea, you stand there and you literally watch the physical evidence of that person instantly dissolve. The wind takes it, the water absorbs it, and within seconds, it's just gone.
Completely vanished from sight.
So how does the human brain process that rapid dispersion without feeling like an overwhelming sense of abandonment or a total loss of connection?
It's a really profound shift. It requires a cognitive leap from containment to omnipresence.
For omnipresence, meaning they are everywhere.
Exactly. Instead of preserving a localized memory, the act of scattering reframes the location of the deceased. The human mind always seeks meaning, right? So when the ashes dissolve into the water, the association transfers from the physical ashes to the ocean itself.
Oh, wow. So the ocean becomes the monument.
Yes. You are trading a very specific, tiny location for an expansive one. If the person's remains are integrated into the ocean, and the ocean touches every single continent, produces the rain, drives the global climate well, then the person isn't confined to a single town anymore.
They aren't in a box under a lawn.
Right. They are everywhere. And this expansive environment encourages reflection because it totally removes the pressure of the visit.
The guilt of not visiting the grave enough.
Exactly. You don't have to travel to a specific plot of land in your hometown to feel connected. You can stand on literally any beach in the world, or honestly even just feel the rain on your face, and you can access that memory.
That is beautiful. It makes the tribute this fundamental interaction with the natural world. It kind of reminds me of the concept of the sublime.
In what way?
Like, you know that feeling of awe and maybe a little bit of terror when you confront something massively larger than yourself, like a mountain range or a hurricane.
Oh, definitely. The sublime.
The ocean evokes that. It shrinks our individual human anxieties. I mean, if you have a loved one who had a restless spirit, or maybe they just loathe the idea of being confined to a hospital bed at the end of their life.
Locking them in a sealed vault underground feels spiritually contradictory.
Yes. The vastness of the ocean perfectly mirrors that desire to be untethered.
And that desire for an authentic, highly personalized reflection of a person's life is really what's driving the modern funeral industry right now.
We customize everything else.
We really do. We customize our lives down to the algorithm of our social media feeds. We customize our diets. It is only logical that we are demanding customization for our final acts.
It makes total sense.
The ocean provides this non-denominational, infinitely customizable environment. It is a space free of the architectural and ideological constraints of a traditional cemetery.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. That space is not completely free of constraints.
No, definitely not.
This is where the romantic, poetic vision of, returning to the sea violently collides with modern bureaucracy and environmental science.
The law always catches up to the poetry.
Always. We've established why families want to do this emotionally, but the actual execution is bound by very strict federal law. I mean, you cannot simply walk down to a crowded public beach in Florida or California, wade into the surf, and just empty an urn.
Oh, absolutely not. Doing that would trigger a massive public health panic.
People would lose their minds.
They really would.
Yeah.
You'd violate multiple municipal codes, and you would flagrantly break federal environmental regulations.
The intersection of private grief and public space is heavily legislated.
Heavily. In the United States, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, holds jurisdiction over this entire process. And their primary mechanism for managing it is something called the 3 nautical mile rule.
The 3-mile rule, okay, let's examine the mechanics of that, because on the surface, it feels incredibly contradictory to me based on what the source material says.
Right.
Well, we know from the text that cremated remains are entirely sterile. The cremation process involves temperatures exceeding, 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit?
Yeah, at least 1,800 degrees. Sometimes hotter.
Right, so all organic matter, All pathogens, all DNA is completely incinerated. What's left behind is essentially just calcium phosphate and sodium.
It's basically mineral bone fragments pulverized into a coarse dust.
Exactly. So from a marine biology standpoint, dumping calcium phosphate into salt water does absolutely nothing to harm the ecosystem.
Zero harm.
There's no toxic runoff. There is no threat to the coral reefs or the local fish populations. So if the remains are completely environmentally harmless, why does the EPA mandate such a rigid, difficult-to-reach boundary? Is it about the fish or is it about the people?
It is 100% about the people.
Yeah.
The boundary has almost nothing to do with protecting marine life from the ashes. It has everything to do with protecting the living public from the psychological shock of encountering human remains.
Because no one wants to swim through that.
Precisely. The immediate coastline, the beaches, the surf zones, the tidal pools, that is highly trafficked recreational space.
Right. Kids are building sandcastles.
If there were no regulations, the sheer volume of families choosing sea scatterings would result in a massive accumulation of bone fragments washing up on public beaches.
Oh, wow. Yeah, when you think about the volume of people doing this.
It would be constant. And even though the remains are biologically inert, the visual reality of seeing human ashes in a swimming area is profoundly disturbing to the general public.
So the 3 miles is essentially just a giant buffer zone.
An extensive buffer zone, yeah. 3 nautical miles pushes the vessel past the state territorial waters and into what is federally managed open ocean.
And what happens out there?
At that distance, the ocean floor drops significantly. The water volume becomes incomprehensibly large, and the tidal currents out there are strong enough to ensure immediate, permanent dispersion.
So the ashes will not wash back to the beach.
Exactly. They won't wash back. The EPA is balancing the environmental impact, which we know is zero, with the sociological impact, which could be severe if they just left it unregulated.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. But this actually brings us to a really fascinating piece of engineering that I learned about in the source material. A product that solves multiple problems at once. The biodegradable urn.
Oh, yes. These are brilliant.
Because, think about it, simply dumping loose ashes over the side of a boat in high winds 3 miles offshore is a recipe for an absolute logistical nightmare.
It's the Big Lebowski scenario.
Yes, exactly. The wind catches the dust, it blows right back onto the deck, it gets into the eyes of the grieving family. It is chaotic and often deeply traumatic instead of peaceful.
I've heard horror stories from boat captains about families trying to just pour loose ashes.
Yeah.
It rarely goes the way they picture in their heads.
So the biodegradable urn seems engineered specifically to mitigate both the physical chaos of the ocean wind and the psychological trauma of a sudden instant release.
It is a remarkable synthesis of chemistry and psychology. Truly.
Let's talk about the chemistry first. What are these things actually made of?
Well, manufacturing relies on materials that are robust enough to transport securely, because you have to drive this thing to the marina, carry it onto a boat, but vulnerable enough to dissolve rapidly upon contact with salt water.
So what kind of materials do that?
We're talking about materials like compressed Himalayan rock salt.
Wow, just salt.
Just salt. Or sometimes recycled mulberry paper bound with natural gelatins. Or even unfired clay.
So no toxic glue holding it together.
None. They contain absolute no metal, no plastics, and no synthetic dyes. It's completely organic.
That is so cool. But the mechanics of how they break down in the water, that's where the real therapeutic value lies, isn't it?
Yes, the pacing of it is crucial.
Because when you place a traditional casket into the ground, the family often watches it lower on those straps, or they throw a handful of dirt on top. It is a physical, timed ritual.
It takes a few minutes. It gives the brain time to catch up.
Right. If you just pour ashes into the ocean, the ritual is over in a microsecond. The biodegradable urn actually slows time down.
It creates a time-released experience.
How does it work when you actually put it in the water?
When the urn is lowered onto the surface, the buoyancy of the dry materials keeps it afloat at first.
So it doesn't just sink like a stone immediately.
No, it bobs on the surface. And this brief period of floating is essential. It gives the family a focal point.
They aren't just staring at empty water.
Right. They're looking at a vessel. It buys them the minutes they need to, say, recite a poem, sing a hymn, or toss organic flower puddles into the water to create a visible ring around the site.
Oh, that's a beautiful image. And while the family is conducting the ceremony above the surface, the chemistry of the urn is doing its job below the surface.
Exactly. The salt, or the paper, begins to wick the ocean water. The natural binders dissolve. The structural integrity of the vessel slowly yields to the environment.
So it starts taking on water.
It does. And the descent is visually very powerful. As the urn takes on water, it loses that buoyancy and begins a slow, gentle sink into the depths.
It slowly fades from view.
Yes, it eventually descends beyond visibility.
Mm.
At that point, the water pressure and the total saturation completely break the vessel apart. It releases the ashes directly onto the ocean floor without any of that surface turbulence we talked about.
So you don't see the ashes scattering at all.
No, it flawlessly mimics the emotional pacing of a traditional burial, that slow lowering, the gradual farewell, but without introducing a single ounce of toxic material into the marine ecosystem.
It's zero-impact sustainability married to deep emotional resonance.
Perfectly said.
And this highlights a major, major shift in how we view death and environmental responsibility.
It's a huge factor for people today.
For decades, the funeral industry has relied on processes that are incredibly hostile to the earth. I mean, embalming relies on formaldehyde, which is a known carcinogen, just to artificially preserve the body for an open casket.
It's incredibly toxic.
And then we place those bodies into heavy steel or copper caskets. And then we seal those caskets inside massive concrete burial vaults in the ground. We are essentially burying tiny toxic landfills all over the country.
That's exactly what they are. The shift towards sea scattering is heavily driven by this growing cultural anxiety about our environmental footprint.
People don't want their last act on Earth to be polluting it.
The sustainability aspect really cannot be overstated. A significant portion of the population now views traditional burial as just an indefensible consumption of land and resources.
It takes up so much space.
Cremation and sea scattering radically reduce that footprint. You are entirely bypassing the formaldehyde, the steel, the concrete, and the perpetual landscaping requirements of a cemetery plot.
No lawnmowers running on gas every week.
Right. You are returning pure minerals to a mineral environment.
But, and this is a big but, accessing that mineral environment requires a boat, a captain, and a pretty solid understanding of maritime law.
You can't just paddleboard out there.
Exactly, which shifts our focus to the stark, practical logistics of actually pulling this off. We established the 3-mile rule. You have to hire a vessel. This introduces an entirely new industry that the source material touches on: licensed maritime memorial providers.
The infrastructure supporting this practice has become highly sophisticated in recent years.
I would imagine so, because grief is utterly exhausting.
It's paralyzing for a lot of people.
The cognitive load required to plan a standard funeral is immense. So asking a grieving family to also navigate coastal weather patterns, charter a seaworthy vessel, and file the mandatory EPA reporting paperwork within 30 days. It's just too much.
It's an impossible ask for someone who just lost a spouse or a parent. Licensed providers exist to remove all of that friction.
They handle the bureaucracy.
They handle the permits, the navigation, the safety protocols, everything.
And the cost difference here is what really stands out to me, because the funeral industry is notoriously expensive.
Unbelievably expensive.
A traditional burial, by the time you factor in purchasing the plot, buying the casket, paying for embalming, commissioning the headstone, and hosting the service, I mean, that easily exceeds $10,000 to $15,000.
Easily. Sometimes much more.
But chartering a boat for a sea scattering is a fraction of that.
It is vastly more accessible. A private boat charter, specifically designed for an ash scattering, usually ranges from maybe $500 to $2,000.
That's a huge drop in price.
It really is. And that depends on the size of the vessel and the duration of the trip. But there are even cheaper options. If a family chooses an unattended scattering, where the captain takes the urn out during a routine voyage and performs the scattering respectfully without the family present, the cost drops to just a few $100s.
Wow, just a few hundred. I want to compare that to a full-body burial at sea, though, because people often confuse the two.
Oh, constantly.
When they hear burial at sea, they picture, like, old naval traditions, sliding a shrouded body off a wooden plank.
Right, the pirate movie version.
Yes. But doing that as a civilian is totally different.
Full-body burial at sea is incredibly rare for civilians, fiercely regulated, and astronomically expensive.
Why is it so much harder?
Well, the EPA requires a full body to be scattered much further out than 3 miles. They often require water depths exceeding 600 feet.
600 feet.
Yes. And the shroud or casket must be specially weighted with heavy metals to ensure it sinks rapidly and permanently to the ocean floor.
So it doesn't wash ashore or get caught up in commercial fishing nets.
Exactly. And the vessels required to safely transport and deploy a heavily weighted body in deep water are massive. The charter costs for a ship like that are prohibitive for almost everyone.
So cremation followed by ash scattering really democratizes the ocean memorial.
It makes the ocean accessible to the average family.
Okay, and speaking of accessibility, these modern maritime providers are offering a feature that completely blew my mind when I first read about it in the source text.
The GPS coordinates.
Yes. We talked earlier about the human need for a fixed point, right? That primal desire for a geographic location to visit. These providers have engineered a solution using satellite technology.
It's a brilliant bridge between ancient ritual and modern tech.
Tell me how this works. When the urn is released, what happens?
When the biodegradable urn is released or the ashes are scattered, the captain of the vessel logs the exact GPS coordinates.
Latitude and longitude.
Exactly. It provides a mathematical certainty in an uncertain environment.
It's literally a digital headstone.
Precisely. You are engaging in this primal elemental ritual with the wind and the salt water, but you are anchoring it with military-grade satellite telemetry. It solves that psychological problem of where are they?
But wait, what does a family actually do with those coordinates? Because if the ocean is constantly moving, the physical water that was at that location during the ceremony is gone within minutes.
The physical water is gone, yes. But the human mind easily attaches significance to the mathematical space.
The idea of the place.
Exactly. 5, 10, or 20 years down the line, a family can charter a boat, hand those exact coordinates to the captain, and navigate back to that precise patch of open ocean.
And what do they do when they get there?
They can throw flowers into that exact latitude and longitude. It serves the exact same psychological function as visiting a grave, but the monument is a coordinate on a navigation screen rather than a piece of granite in the dirt.
That is fascinating, that intersection of cold technology and warm ancient ritual. But, it also brings up some intense cultural and religious friction.
Oh, absolutely.
Not every tradition views the ocean or even cremation itself through the same lens. If a family is incredibly diverse in its belief systems, proposing an ash scattering at sea can trigger a massive ideological crisis.
The theological implications are incredibly complex.
Let's look at a few examples. What does the Hindu tradition say about this?
If you look at Hinduism, cremation is not just an option. It is a spiritual mandate.
They have to be cremated.
Yes. The physical body must be destroyed by fire to release the soul. And scattering those ashes in a sacred body of water, historically the Ganges River, but increasingly just the ocean, that is the final step in breaking the cycle of reincarnation.
The water purifies
The
them.
water purifies and absorbs the remains. For a Hindu family, an ocean scattering aligns perfectly with millennia of religious doctrine. It's deeply sacred.
But let's contrast that with the Catholic perspective, which is almost the exact opposite.
Very much the opposite. For centuries, the Vatican strictly forbade cremation. They viewed it as a denial of the resurrection of the body.
They only lifted that ban relatively recently, right?
In 1963,
Wow, that is recent.
and even today, while cremation is allowed by the Church, the Vatican has been fiercely explicit that ashes must not be scattered.
They have to stay together.
They mandate that cremated remains must be kept intact and stored in a sacred place, like a Catholic cemetery or a dedicated columbarium. They explicitly reject the idea of the remains becoming part of the natural world.
Because it borders on pantheism.
Exactly. The idea that God is in the trees and the water, the Church rejects that.
So imagine a modern family where the deceased explicitly wrote in their will that they wanted to be scattered at sea. But the surviving parents or siblings are devout Catholics who believe scattering the ashes literally violates their fundamental religious tenets.
It creates a heart-wrenching conflict.
How do you resolve that? This is where I feel like the private boat charter becomes a crucial tool for negotiation.
It absolutely does. Because a boat is a non-denominational, unregulated space, families can design hybrid ceremonies that compromise.
What does that compromise actually look like in practice out on the water?
Well, a family might choose to use a biodegradable urn, but instead of using the rapid dissolving model that scatters the ashes quickly, they might use one that sinks completely intact to the ocean floor.
Ah, see.
So to the Catholic family members, the remains are kept together in a single container and laid to rest in the deep, satisfying that need for containment. But to the family members honoring the deceased's wishes, the person is returned to the ocean.
It threads the needle perfectly.
Furthermore, the privacy of the charter allows for incredibly diverse rituals on the deck. A priest can perform traditional Catholic prayers and blessings, satisfying the need for religious orthodoxy. And that can be followed immediately by a secular reading of a poem and the dropping of flowers by another family member.
The ocean serves as neutral territory.
Exactly. It's a space where conflicting doctrines can coexist without the rigid oversight of a physical religious institution.
That flexibility really feels like the defining characteristic of modern grief. We are stripping away the rigid rules, the static monuments, and replacing them with highly personalized, negotiated experiences.
It's all about finding what actually brings peace to the living.
Which brings us right back to those foundational insights from the funeral program site. We are witnessing the rise of this practice because it sits perfectly at the intersection of three massive modern priorities.
Right. First, the emotional need for a meaningful, expansive tribute.
Second, the moral imperative to reduce our environmental footprint.
And third, the practical necessity of avoiding catastrophic financial debt from funeral costs.
It is an incredibly compelling alternative to traditional burial when you lay it out like that. I mean, we've explored how the EPA's 3-mile rule creates this necessary boundary between private mourning and public recreation.
We've broken down the chemistry of those biodegradable urns.
We've looked at how GPS technology allows us to map a digital headstone onto a totally featureless sea. It's a highly regulated, scientifically grounded process that somehow still manages to preserve the raw, elemental poetry of returning to nature.
The architecture of the ceremony has definitely changed, but the core human need to honor the transition remains exactly the same. We are just using latitude, longitude, and water-soluble minerals instead of granite and soil.
I love that. Now, before we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a concept that radically redefines what a final resting place actually is.
This is my favorite part of the deep dive.
It's mind-blowing. The source material describes returning ash into the ocean as a continuation of the cycle of life carried forward by the tides. And if we look at the actual mechanics of the ocean, we know about something called the thermohaline circulation.
The global conveyor belt.
Yes, this massive system of deep ocean currents that connects every single ocean on Earth.
It is literally the circulatory system of the planet. Water from the Atlantic eventually travels to the Indian Ocean, to the Pacific, and down into the freezing depths of the Antarctic.
So think about what that means. If a biodegradable urn sinks to the ocean floor off the coast of California and those calcium phosphate minerals are released into the current, they do not stay off the coast of California.
No, they do.
Over decades and centuries, those exact elements will be pulled into that global conveyor belt. They will circulate the entire globe.
They become part of the evaporation cycle, too.
Right. They will become the rain that falls on a forest in Europe or the snow that caps a mountain in Asia.
The dispersion is absolute. The deceased literally becomes integrated into the meteorological and biological functioning of the Earth itself.
Which means the entire concept of a localized final resting place is just an illusion. The resting place isn't 3 miles offshore.
The resting place is the entire planet.
The person you are honoring is no longer contained in a specific box in a specific town. They are in the weather. They are in the tides pulling at the shorelines of every continent on Earth. The human brain wants a fixed pin on a map to visit, but the ocean offers something so much larger. It offers the realization that once you give someone back to the water, you never have to travel to visit them again, because they are everywhere the water touches.
It's a profound thought to carry with you.
It really is. Think about the sheer scale of that connection the next time you stand on a coastline and look out at the water. Thanks for joining us on the Funeral Channel for this deep dive.